I was born on what is now called Veteran Street in New Richmond. It was, in the depth of the Depression, so there was no money. But we were very fortunate living on a small farm. There was always lots to eat. We never had any money, but we always had lots to eat. And that, we were fortunate in that respect, because there were families living in New Richmond then who were on the point of starvation, because it was, it was grim, and there was no social welfare in those days either.
In the summer of 1940, Canada was officially at war against Nazi Germany. Army recruiting officers fanned across the country in search of volunteers. The Royal Rifles Regiment arrived in the Gaspé.
Well, at 18, what do you dream about? I don't think I had any dreams. I joined the army because everybody else was doing it, and I wanted to get away, really, get adventure, so I did.
My name is Dell. I'm the volunteer curator of the Chaleur Bay Military Museum, and I'd like to welcome you to the museum. This area of Canada has always had an extremely high rate of enlistment in military service, both in the past and even today in the present. So we've had families where generations have been in military service at one point or another, or families where 5 brothers went to war, or 7 children were in. So it's always been an extremely important part of the local heritage and culture.
The tradition of military service is woven tightly into Gaspesian history. Local militia units were active here as early as the 1780s, when the first wave of loyalist families began to settle.
The communities along the coast here were quite concerned about the possibility or threat of American invasion. So they formed different militia groups to protect the area. And in New Richmond was the 2nd Bonaventure County Militia, and we've got a few very special artifacts dating from that time. This coat is actually originally from the Napoleonic Wars in 1812 in Europe. And it was used by the 1st Edinburgh Regiment. And after Napoleon was banished to the Isle of Elba, the regiment was disbanded and the coats were just put into storage. When William Cuthbert, who was a local shipbuilder here on the point, went home to visit family in Scotland, he bought the coats of this disbanded regiment and brought them back for use for the local militia.
Artifacts also speak to the impact of distant conflicts.
This saber, or this sword right here, belongs to Henry Hurd, who fought in the U.S. Civil War between 1860 and 1865. He was fighting with the Union Army and deserted, and he eventually settled in Grand Cascapedia and married a local woman and started a farm and a family. This is John Macpherson Almond, and he was from Shigawak, Port Daniel, and he is the only Gaspesian that I currently know about that served in the Boer War in South Africa between 1889 and 1901. He also served in the First World War. So when war broke out in 1914, he re-enlisted, and we've got a copy of his enlistment paper here, and he served again as a clergyman for the Canadian troops overseas. This area has always had a much higher rate of enlistment, and that was definitely true during the First World War. In Cascapedia and St. Jules alone, more than 138 men enlisted. And Cascapedia and St. Jules are small communities, much smaller than New Richmond.
The first contingent of Canadian troops to sail for Europe left Gaspé Bay on October 3, 1914. For a great number of soldiers, the receding Gaspé coastline would be their last glimpse of Canada. During the First World War, it was not uncommon for several members of the same family to enlist. Consider the Golette brothers from the town of New Richmond.
And all 3 brothers served during the First World War. They all survived and came home, but J. Augustine, who's on the far left, lost his arm.
Only one more kit inspection, only one more church parade, and we leave for France or Egypt, but we never feel afraid. When my country was in danger and they called for volunteers, I felt I should go, dear mother, though it filled your eyes with tears. Now I am wearing khaki, mother, and that color never runs, and I'll soon be with the brave boys that are driving back the Huns. This morning when reveille sounded, all my thoughts were homeward led, and I brought my pen and paper and sat down upon my bed, just to write a note to mother, for I'm sure it will bring her joy to receive a little letter from her dear own soldier boy. I shall not forget you, mother, though I am so far away, and if it be God's will to spare us, we'll meet some future day. I will then regard you, mother, as I should have done before, and do my duty as your son, till all my life is o'er. Yes, I know that I have been wayward all these years I've spent with you, but I know I'll be forgiven by a mother kind and true. How I long to see the old farm and the cottage that is my home, by the little lakes and rivers where I always loved to roam. I'm not afraid to die, mother, for a cause that's brave and true, but in the heights of battle, mother, I'll often think of you. Give my best regards to father and the ones I've left behind. Tell them to write a letter, for they never leave my mind. Now write a good long answer for your dear own soldier boy, for news from Maple Leaves always brings Canadians joy. Goodbye, mother, I will close this, for I think I've told you all, and I will await an answer, though it be very small.
New Richmond, Grand Cascapedia, St. Jules, Maria. From these small communities around Cascapedia Bay, the outbreak of the Second World War triggered a chain of events destined to lead a group of 53 young Gaspesians directly into cruel captivity. Philip Doddridge was among them.
I was walking down Main Street one evening with a couple of friends, and I saw this sign, and so I went in. The recruiting officer's name was Captain Bill Le Boutelier, and he was sitting behind a desk, and that's about all I can recall. There was a doctor there. I forget whether it was a local doctor or one that was part of the team, but anyway, I had a superficial medical and passed, and the next day I was on the train to go to Quebec City and started doing left, right, left, right.
After training in New Brunswick, the Royal Rifles moved to Gander, Newfoundland, and the city of St. John's before being sent abroad. Philip Doddridge was not to see battle in Europe, it turned out. Instead, his regiment boarded a train for Vancouver, and from there was shipped to the faraway British colony of Hong Kong.
And at that time, the Canadian government didn't think that Hong Kong was like to see much action. For whatever reason, the Canadian and British generals just thought that it was going to be more guard duty, not so unlike what they'd done in Gander. So many of the troop transport vehicles, a lot of the ammunition, a lot of the resources that would normally go with a regiment into war were delayed and weren't sent with them. And indeed, when they were sent, were diverted to Manila and never arrived.
On December 8, 1941, the Japanese launched an invasion of Hong Kong timed to coincide with airstrikes against the U.S. Navy at Pearl Harbor. Canadian, British, and Indian regiments defended Hong Kong for 3 weeks before finally surrendering on Christmas Day. As prisoners of war, Philip Doddridge and his fellow soldiers would spend the next 3.5 years struggling to survive horrific living conditions. Fed a starvation diet, the Hong Kong prisoners were also forced to perform back-breaking labor, beginning with Kai Tak Airport.
Kai Tak Airport had one runway, and at the end of the runway there was a sizable hill, just a mound, a hill. And the Japanese thought that they could extend the length of the runway by removing the hill. So with Pick and Shovel, we tried to do it. And what they did, they laid a sort of a tramway, two rails, I'm sure they were just made of wood. And a cart to go on the rail, and it probably held about a cubic yard of dirt, and it would push it up the hill, load it, and then gravity would run down the hill, and it was shaped like an inverted pyramid, so that the bottom of the box was smaller, you see, and there was handles on the side of it, so we'd get it down to the bottom, lift this off, upset the dirt over the side, push it back up the hill, load it, and repeat. Malnutrition was with us throughout the whole time. After about 6 or 8 months after we were captured, we were living on rice and bok choy and no protein. So eventually our bodies just gave out. And the worst part was pain in the feet. Now, of course, I suppose the part affected in your body is the part furthest away from the central, and so the feet got sore. There was a diphtheria epidemic, and the Japanese refused to bring the antitoxin into the camp, and we were dying off pretty fast, up to 5 a day. And I contracted the disease, but by good fortune, it was after the Japs had relented and brought the serum into the camp. So my life was saved for that reason. Then the Japanese restricted the number of hospital workers. So Dr. Crawford, who was the chief medical officer, kept me in the hospital under the guise of being a patient. Well, actually I was a nurse's assistant, an orderly. Yeah? So I spent a year or so doing that. And I was able to provide a lot of comfort to a lot of my comrades that way.
Today, the Baie de Chaleur Military Museum is the only museum in Canada with a permanent exhibit devoted to the Canadian experience in Hong Kong. Their mission? To preserve and share the story of each and every Hong Kong vet.
So this is part of the project, that we are making a database as well with all the information on it that we have. And we are also have an online version attached with our website.
After the war, Phil Doddridge trained to work as a teacher and enjoyed a long career in education in Quebec. It was he and fellow Gaspesian veterans who came up with the idea of creating the military museum, not to brood or to blame, but to remember and reflect on the lives of all those who willingly serve and face the consequences in times of war.
You know, I have a philosophy that hate hurts only the hater, because the person who is hated doesn't, sometimes not even aware that he's being hated. So I say hate hurts the hater, not the hated. I don't know if that ever makes sense or not, but that's what I believe.